You ever move into a place and feel like something's just off? I don't mean haunted or anything. I mean the kind of off that's hard to explain. Like the walls remember something, like the air is holding its breath. I moved into this basement apartment last spring. The landlord was some guy named Rob who owned the house and rented out the lower level. It was cheap, furnished, and had a private entrance around back. I needed space, fast, and this seemed perfect. It was one of those garden-level places, partly underground, but with just enough sunlight to not feel like a dungeon. Living room, kitchenette, bedroom, and a bathroom tucked behind a narrow hallway. Not bad for the price. The first weird thing I noticed was the vent in the bedroom. It didn't connect to the HVAC. Rob had told me there was baseboard heating, but there was this little metal vent up near the ceiling, like one you'd find in an office. When I asked about it, he just shrugged and said, "Old house. That one doesn't go anywhere." Didn't think much of it. But the first night I spent there alone, I swear I heard something. Not loud, just a soft rustle, like fabric shifting or someone adjusting in their seat. I thought maybe Rob was upstairs moving around. The vent, after all, was near the ceiling. Maybe it picked up noise from the floor above. You ever talk yourself out of being creeped out? That's what I did. Threw on a podcast, fell asleep with the light on. But every night after that, I started hearing more. Always from that same vent. Faint noises. Breathing, maybe. Sometimes little thumps, like fingertips tapping lightly on metal. It wasn't constant, just enough to make me listen. Enough to make me stop mid-sentence on the phone and tilt my head toward the ceiling. The worst part? The noises didn't follow a pattern. They'd come at random hours. Midnight, 3 a.m. Once during the day while I was working from home. One night I stood on a chair and got up close to the vent just to reassure myself it was nothing. I shined a flashlight into it. Pitch black. But as I stared in, holding my breath, I swear to God, I heard a voice whisper, "I know you can hear me now." I dropped the flashlight. Nearly fell off the chair trying to get down. I didn't scream, I didn't even move at first. I just stood there, staring at that vent like it had grown eyes. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and my mouth had gone dry. Had I really heard that? You ever second-guess something so hard, you start thinking you imagined it just to stay sane? I didn't sleep that night. I turned the TV on low and just sat on the couch until the sun came up. Every time I looked at that vent, I felt like I was being watched from behind it. The next morning, I told Rob about the voice. He laughed, like I was making it up. "It's an old vent, sound carries in weird ways," he said. "Probably the plumbing or the wind." I wanted to believe that, but something deep in my gut said otherwise. I started recording audio at night, just voice memos from my phone. The first few nights, static, ambient noise, nothing. But on the fifth night, I caught something. A faint voice buried beneath the hum. Slowed it down, turned up the volume, and there it was. "You're not alone down there." I deleted it. I didn't want it on my phone. I didn't want proof. Because proof would mean it was real, and real meant I had to deal with it. But it didn't stop. Over the next week, the voice got bolder, louder, sometimes laughing, sometimes whispering words I couldn't understand. And then came the scratching. At first, it was just light, like fingernails on metal, then louder, closer. Once it sounded like whatever was behind that vent was clawing at it, trying to get through. That night, I packed a bag and stayed at a friend's place. I told him it was plumbing issues. He didn't ask questions. I returned the next afternoon, determined to check it out. I brought a screwdriver and climbed up on the chair again. I was done being scared. The screws came out easy. The metal grate creaked as I pulled it away, and behind it, nothing, just an empty shaft, no ductwork, no crawlspace, just a narrow hole in the wall that led somewhere, black and silent and deep, except there was something tucked inside. A piece of paper, folded small. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers shaking. You heard me. Now I'll hear you. That was it. I moved out 2 days later. Didn't argue about the lease, didn't explain why, and I haven't lived below ground since. But some nights, even in a new apartment on the 5th floor, when the building settles just right, I swear I hear something whispering through the vents. You ever stay somewhere you know you shouldn't? Not because it's dangerous on paper, not because something obvious is wrong, just that deep, gnawing feeling in your gut that says leave. That was me 4 years ago. I was in the middle of a solo road trip, just me, my camera, and a plan to see places most people skip. I loved back roads, forgotten towns, strange little motels with glowing vacancy signs and retro charm. I used to think it was romantic. Now I'm not so sure. The place was called Hillpine Inn, though the sign had been missing the E in pine for who knows how long. I'd been driving for 10 hours when I spotted it off a wooded back road. The sun had already dipped behind the trees. My GPS had lost signal 20 miles ago. It looked sad. One long row of rooms. A flickering ice machine, the kind of place with handwritten office signs taped to the window. But I was too tired to keep driving. The woman behind the glass looked like she hadn't slept in days. Eyes sunken, voice flat. She barely said anything as she handed me the key to room 9. I remember she paused before doing it, though. Like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Room 9 was near the end of the row, under a dying floodlight. The air smelled like mold and carpet shampoo, but it had a bed, a working lamp, and a little window that faced the woods behind the building. I locked the door, double-checked the window latch, and dropped face first onto the mattress. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. Not to a noise, not to movement, just that feeling, like I'd been pulled awake by something I didn't hear, but should have. I sat up and looked around. The air was still. The room silent. That's when I noticed the window. The curtain had been drawn halfway open. I was sure I'd closed it before bed. And right then, in the weak glow from the floodlight outside, I saw something. A face. Not clear, just the shape of one, pressed against the glass. Watching. It was a girl, young, pale, eyes wide, and she was smiling. I froze. You ever have that moment where your body wants to move, but your brain just locks up? That was me, sitting upright in bed, staring at the window while my pulse hammered in my ears. The glass fogged slightly where her breath hit it, and the longer I looked, the more I realized she wasn't blinking, just watching and still smiling. I couldn't see her clothes clearly, just pale skin, dark hair, and that expression, like she was waiting for me to do something. I reached for my phone. Dead. I remember charging it before bed, I'm sure I did, but the screen was black, wouldn't even turn on. I looked toward the lamp, still on, but the light wasn't reaching the corners of the room anymore, like the shadows had grown thicker, closer. I crawled out of bed slowly, keeping my eyes on the window, but as I moved, her face started to fade, not move away, just fade. Like steam on a mirror disappearing. By the time I got to the glass, she was gone. No footsteps, no rustle of bushes, just the outline of a handprint left behind on the glass. Small, almost child-sized. I locked the window again, even though it was never unlocked. Then I shoved the dresser in front of it just in case. You ever try to sleep after something like that? I stayed awake until sunrise, shaking. At first light, I went to the front office to ask the woman if there were kids staying at the motel, just trying to make sense of it, hoping maybe it was some prank. She just stared at me for a second, then said, "Room 9 shouldn't have been rented." I asked her what that meant. She looked down, fiddled with a ring on her finger, and said, "A girl died in that room years ago. Window open, freezing night. No one found her until morning." My throat went dry. I asked her how long ago that happened. She wouldn't say. I left without showering, threw my bag in the car, and didn't stop driving until I hit the state line. Since then, I haven't stayed in any roadside motels. I don't care how late it is or how far I've driven. I'll sleep in my car before I sleep in a room with a window facing the woods. And even now, in my apartment, I check the curtains twice before bed. I don't know why. It's been years. But sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I swear I hear a breath against the glass. And when I look, the curtains open. You ever live in an old house that makes a little too much noise? Creaking floors, groaning pipes, distant thuds you chalk up to just the house settling. You tell yourself it's normal. You tell yourself everyone hears these things. But sometimes, they're not settling sounds. Sometimes, they're warnings. I was renting a guest house in Vermont last winter. A friend of my aunt's owned the property and let me stay there for cheap while I worked remotely. The main house was up on the hill. The guest house was down a long gravel driveway, tucked into a wooded slope. It was peaceful, secluded. Just me, my laptop, and the snow. The place had that old New England charm. Stone foundation, crooked beams, wood stove, and floors that groaned when you walked too fast. The bedroom was in the back, tucked behind a narrow hall, with a window that looked out into the woods. I fell in love with it almost immediately. The noises started my second week there. At first, it was nothing, just creaks at night. You know how cold weather makes everything shift a little? I figured it was just that. But then one night, I heard a noise that made my skin crawl. It was subtle, barely more than a whisper, but it sounded like movement. Not in the walls, not from the roof, from underneath the floor. It was like someone shifting their weight on old wood. Slow, deliberate, like they were trying not to be heard. I sat up in bed and held my breath. Nothing. Then I heard it again. A low scrape, like fingernails dragging across the underside of the boards. I got up with a flashlight and checked the house. Everything was locked. No signs of animals, no open windows. I told myself it was pipes, maybe the heater, maybe even a raccoon. You ever tell yourself it's probably nothing, even though every part of your body is screaming that it's something? The next night, I fell asleep with headphones in, hoping I wouldn't hear it again. I woke up around 3 a.m., not to sound, but to silence. That kind of silence that feels too perfect. I pulled out my headphones and waited. Then, directly beneath my bed, I heard 3 distinct knocks. 3 slow knocks, right beneath me. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just sat there, frozen in the dark, wondering if I'd actually heard it, if maybe I'd imagined it in that weird space between dreaming and waking. Then it came again, knock, knock, knock. I jumped out of bed so fast I nearly tripped. I turned on every light in the house. Stood in the living room holding a fireplace poker like it was going to do anything against whatever that was. You ever feel like you're not alone, even when every room is empty? The next morning, I went outside and walked around the foundation. The crawlspace hatch was hidden around the back of the house near the edge of the woods. I hadn't touched it since moving in. But now the padlock was missing, just gone. Not broken, not damaged, just gone. And the hatch, slightly open, a few inches, just enough. I closed it and put a heavy cinder block on top. I didn't have a lock, but I figured that would keep out raccoons. That's what I told myself anyway. That night, I barely slept. The heater kicked on, the walls creaked, but I didn't hear any knocks. I started to think maybe it had just been an animal. Maybe I was letting the isolation mess with my head. But then, 2 nights later, I woke up to something worse. Whispering. Not under the floor. Inside the room. I sat up and saw nothing. But I could hear it, just low enough that I couldn't make out words. Just breath and tone. Right near the foot of the bed. And then, slowly, the boards beneath my feet let out a long, deep groan. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it toward the door. That's when I saw it. A thin line of fresh dust outlining the exact shape of the crawlspace hatch, trailing into the hallway leading toward my bedroom. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and drove to the main house at the top of the hill. I didn't even knock. I just waited in the car with the engine running until the owner's porch light flipped on. She stepped out, wrapped in a robe, confused. I tried to explain, but my words were all over the place. Then she asked something that chilled me. "Did you open the crawl space?" I told her no. That it had been unlocked. That I'd heard noises under the floor. She looked down for a long time and said, "That door was sealed years ago." Apparently, someone else had lived there long before me. A tenant back in the 90s. Quiet guy. Lived alone. Vanished one winter. No forced entry, no sign of a struggle, just gone. No one found him, no note, no trace. But the floorboards near the bed, they'd been pried up from underneath. I didn't go back, left my stuff behind. I moved back to the city 2 weeks later, and I still haven't unpacked the boxes. You ever walk into a new apartment and check under the rugs, just in case? Yeah, me too.